Hi, welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Congressman Mark Pocan. With us for one question today is my amazing colleague from the 4th District of Wisconsin, Representative Gwen Moore. Gwen, thanks so much for being with us today.
And it's always a joy to be with you, friend.
Well, thank you. So I have one question for you. If you had the ability, I know we got this whole legislative process and committees and rules and all the rest we got to go through, but if you could change without having to go through any of these processes, any one federal law, what would be that one federal law and why would you make that change? I know that's a big question.
Okay, it's just like a big question. Change a federal law, or could I create a federal law?
You can create too, because it's
I want the legislature to repeal the Supreme Court's decision that the president is immune from prosecution. That is the law that if Democrats ever get back into the majority, for not only Republican presidents, for any president in the future, you are not above the law.
Because we are co-equal branches of government.
That's
and
right.
If you have one person who then can try to operate like a king, then we got a problem.
No Kings Act. That is what I would change.
I like that, Gwen. Thanks so much for being with us this week, and keep fighting. When you look at all the issues that may have an impact on jobs, the economy, productivity, and so much more facing our country, artificial intelligence certainly tops every list. But do we really know what it means for the future? Do we really know how it will change the economy and jobs? Do we know what it means for advances in technology and medicine? There's a lot to discuss about AI, and I would argue Congress may not be up to the challenge ahead on this. We just don't discuss technology well, much less anything as big as changes with AI. So today, we're going to try to scratch the surface and hopefully a little more, I hope. And we're going to do that with someone from AI Now Institute. AI Now Institute is an independent research institute providing expert analysis to challenge and reimagine the current trajectory of AI. They were founded in 2017. They diagnose and provide policy advice on artificial intelligence. They were even invited to advise the U.S. Federal Trade Commission on this work in 2021. That's quite a big honor to recognize the significance of their work. And important, they do not take funding from corporate donors, including the tech industry, as they aim to hold everyone accountable. So with us today, we have Sarah Myers West, who has spent the last 15 years dealing with policymaking, and she's currently co-directing AI Now. Her resume could easily fill a half hour. I'm not going to go deep into it other than to say you have yourself in very good hands talking about AI with Sarah Myers West from AI Now. Sarah, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's just start off simple, or maybe not simple, but maybe 30,000 foot. What is artificial intelligence generally, and why should we all care more about it?
I'm so glad that you started with this question, because I think we're in a moment where there is so much excitement and anxiety about this technology and what it's going to bring to all of us. And I think it's really important to ground it in the material reality. So AI as a field has been around for almost 70 years. And over that time, the term has meant many different things from like a technological standpoint. AI as it exists today refers to technologies where you're relying on very large pools of data that might be scraped from the web. It may be collected through commercial surveillance processes or other as we move through our lives, we're producing data exhaust. But in any of those contexts, the collection of large pools of data, running statistical methods on that data, and using large amounts of computing infrastructure, the data centers that you're probably reading about in the newspapers, to look for patterns, draw insights. We've been talking a lot recently about generative AI, where you use those basic functions to try and predict what the next text, like you would want to say to like complete a sentence.
Yeah.
But the same function is true if you're talking about facial recognition or automated decision-making systems, the kinds of algorithms that might be used in, deciding what mortgage rate you're going to get. So that sort of the 3-part formula kind of applies across all AI, even as there's some specifics in different kinds of applications.
And where are we, do you think, in, if 1 is the beginning of AI and 10 is where it's going to, be at its culmination? Where are we on that 1 to 10 scale with AI?
I would almost want to reframe that because it presumes that there's going to be a trajectory for AI that's going to happen no matter what. I think we get to decide. Like, we get to decide how much this technology is going to shape our lives and our livelihoods, the institutions that we engage with. So, I think we're in a phase where there is, increasing use of AI in many domains of life. It's, when I joined the FTC, I think it was still a moment where we were talking about a digital economy. And now I think it's just the economy. Like these technologies are kind of everywhere, but I think it's important, particularly from a policy perspective, to hold and frame that like there's a lot of scope to shape the direction that AI takes. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure that it's ultimately serving the interests of the public.
Which takes me to exactly where I was going. Are we currently regulated enough? And maybe what is adequate regulation for AI and given where we're at right now?
Great question. So in the current frame around AI, a lot of the way that this technology is being regulated is after the fact. It's when you kind of surface up that there's been a violation of consumer protection law or fraud or scams or, discrimination. And then, bring a case and try and sort of fix it after the fact. The problem is that there's a lot of domains where AI is being deployed where like you really can't remedy a harm that's occurred. If you're talking about an AI system that's used in a hospital setting and it's caused a patient harm, like you can't just remedy that. And so I think it's important for regulation to intervene much further up in the supply chain to make sure that when companies are producing AI products and deploying them in the public at large, there's enough friction that they're testing and validating and making sure like these products even work as intended, and also that they're not causing harm and violating the law. And I don't think that we have a regulatory regime that's sufficiently doing that right now.
One of the main organizations that does AI or tries to, do this, and I'm not sure the proper terminology, I apologize, came into the office and they said, they were concerned. They were asking essentially for regulation because they were afraid if China does it first or Europe does it first, and if we don't do it first, that may set the worldwide standard for this. And, that brought me to right away, if this is global, I mean, how does regulation work? If we do it here, but it's a global phenomenon, how do we really handle this?
So I think that there is a frequent myth that if you regulate the tech sector, it's going to harm innovation. And I think that what we've seen in practice in other areas is that you can really stage a race to the top. Like if this is a domain where there's a lot of technology that is snake oil, doesn't really quite work, it's hallucinating, it's like not sort of delivering on its promise, you want to have the right kind of friction that causes these companies to compete to build better products, rather than just to compete to do more and to sort of spread it everywhere. And that's the kind of race that I think we want to be staging right now.
And is that something though that is going to be U.S. centered, or how does that happen globally? What's in your opinion, the best approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is an important need for global cooperation and dialogue. I think that there's frequently sort of regulation that's defined in the US or the EU kind of is then diffused out to the majority world. And this is a technology that's really being built globally and affecting people globally. So I think that there is, important scope for having, stronger and more robust international dialogues. I think we saw that at the UN, just a few weeks ago too, that sort of need for creating these big scientific panels so that we're having conversations about the cutting edge of this technology.
Good. So I think a lot of people now are talking about, people that as I'm out in the district, people are using AI in a very simple way, writing a paper, writing a letter, asking questions for a variety of purposes. There's even classes that pop up on how to put the right question to AI to get the right answer. But does that actually represent the breadth of AI, and how else should we be looking at AI?
Yeah. So I think there's a different kind of public conversation that we're having now because of the existence of ChatGPT and these other kinds of AI systems that we're able to use, where we're able to tangibly engage with them. But if you wound back the clock a couple of years, most of the AI systems that we were talking about in policy circles were the kind of AI that's used on us. It's algorithmic decision-making systems that are deciding, whether you're going to get called in for a job interview or the cost of your health insurance coverage. It's algorithmic pricing mechanisms that decide the cost of the goods on the shelves or how much you're going to get paid. And those kinds of more invisibilized uses of AI are having a profound impact on people's lives. And there, I think the big difference is that the way that those AI systems work, they're fundamentally making power asymmetries much bigger. So those that are using the technology on folks, those who have who are procuring the technology, gain power from using AI systems because they're able to collect more data, draw insights from that data, and those on whom AI is being used lose power because our institutions that are making decisions about us are more opaque. It's harder to understand, why I was denied a bank loan or why I didn't get called in for that job.
Which is really problematic, right?
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. And, I know one of the things that we have concern on right now, they're talking about changing Medicare in a way in 6 states, an experiment to how they do prior authorization with Medicare Advantage. But they want to work with the insurance companies and AI tools to essentially supersede a doctor and a patient. And that's where it starts to get a little scary.
It gets really scary when you're talking about the uses of AI in healthcare. I mean, we've seen insurance companies calibrate their AI systems so that they're going to automatically deny any claim that comes in because it helps them reduce costs. They've calibrated the system that way. And we're seeing AI be used in hospitals in ways that are reducing the number of nurses that are staffing beds. Really janky systems being used to monitor people's heart rates and things that are sort of just improperly calibrated. It's really being treated as kind of a Wild West that isn't getting very much scrutiny, and it's one of the places that really, frankly, keeps me up at night the most.
Yeah, the one that I think I hear the most from people that are keeping them up at night is the future of work, and what does it mean to the job market and the jobs that we currently do. And all the different industries that could be affected. How do you talk about that? Because, obviously some you can see already. If it can write a letter or write an email in an instant, there's certain jobs that are going there, but you can now write scripts, you can do animation, you can, go down the list. And a lot of people, for a lot of reasons, are very concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a reasonable conversation that folks are having about this concern about, is AI going to take my job? Mm-hmm. And I think that the most important thing to keep in frame there is that the AI doesn't necessarily have to work for companies to use it as a justification for reducing their headcount, for paying people less, for making work less dignified. That world, I think, is not the world that we want to live in. And so where I feel the most hopeful is what we're seeing come from where workers are organizing and saying, that workers should be really determining whether and under what conditions AI is used, like the WGA strike. The writers were able to negotiate with the studios and say, you can't use AI to replace us, but we do get to, sort of decide under what conditions we use AI to augment the writing process. And I think that kind of approach where, workers and workplaces are not just having a seat at the table, but really having a determining role in where AI technologies get used is closer to the world that we want to live in, where, we have jobs that have dignity, that are good jobs, the kinds of jobs that we want to have, and we don't just sort of leave it up to AI, but even more so companies that use AI as a justification for layoffs.
Yeah, and I had some of the workers in. Maybe that's why it was fresh in mind, that example, and you brought it right up. But they were able to negotiate in a way that they could have control over how that's going to work. Healthcare, we talked about it a little bit, but I really see a lot of good and bad within the healthcare and how AI can be used. And on one hand, we can speed up research analysis. I'm hearing that from researchers because of what AI can help do. Our medical records, it's helping in that area for electronic medical records and things, so that, someone, if they are sick or have an accident somewhere that's not their home, they can still get the information, and AI can help in that way. But then we know you lose the human touch between a patient and a doctor. And if you have decisions being made at some automated level. So when it comes to healthcare, what do you see as the biggest pluses and minuses that we should be really watching for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, it's important that we want a healthcare system that is going to work for everybody. And that means that we do need to be innovating and staying at the cutting edge of biomedical sciences. I think we also need to be really grappling with the core fundamentals of the ways that our healthcare system is broken. And I think my concern is that the way that AI is being used is often as a panacea for those underlying problems. It's trying to, use AI to gloss over the fact that doctors and nurses are being made to spend so much time producing medical records because of the demands of insurance companies. And they're not spending that time like interfacing with their patients and giving them the care that they need. Instead of funding, under-resourced hospital systems, we're trying to push AI systems to kind of like solve that problem, like having AI and sort of remote healthcare replace the doctors that we need to be placing in rural communities. So I think the plus and minus really is that there are like these underlying trenchant problems that are not going to be fixed through AI, but we can think more deliberately about like the resourcing that's needed to fix the issue and what role AI might have to play with it.
And then tangentially, I think we just talked a little bit about it, but insurance, when it comes to healthcare, or for that matter, your car insurance or anything else, using AI tools, but in some cases that could be seen to be discriminatory, or it could be seen, as you said, to be tweaked to a level you turn down for automatically making profit as opposed to providing healthcare. Can you talk about that part of concern with AI?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that I described AI at the start, right, was that these are systems that are using statistical methods on huge pools of data that's produced through society. And what that means is that there's going to be an inherent tendency for AI systems that are trained on an unequal society to then replicate and kind of scale up those patterns of inequality. And I think we see that in many different places, but insurance is certainly one of them, where you're going to see a propensity toward replicating, patterns of inequality in society, charging people differentially based on their race or their identity, or where they live, in ways that are fundamentally discriminatory. And I think that the most nefarious part is that often it's harder to tell where that's happening, because we're not there's no sort of mandate for disclosure where AI is being used.
Gotcha. And I loved how you called it data exhaust. I'm not going to forget that. I really, that's a great visual way to remember because everywhere we touch, We're putting information out there about ourselves, and AI is able to grab that unique information about us, and it can be used well, or it can be used against our best interests.
Well, and it's not like this is sort of a naturally occurring phenomenon, right? Like exhaust is also not naturally occurring. It's something that's produced by companies that are like mandating the collection of that data. And there are interventions that we can use to, reduce that and to make sure that, especially the big tech companies that are best poised to reap all of the benefits, aren't doing that at the cost of our privacy, but also our lives and livelihoods.
Yeah, no, and that's been a much bigger conversation that I've seen Congress also not handle well, because we just don't when it comes to it. I mean, we've got members who recently gave up beepers, right? Maybe we need to go to people like yourself to get the expert information. Speaking of federal government agencies using this, the Pentagon has started to make an effort to use AI. Should that worry us?
Yeah, there's been a big push going back to really like 2016 at least to be really upscaling the use of AI in military settings. The thing that really worries me about the current state of affairs is, a lot of the earlier phases of AI that was used in national security context was kind of like built within military agencies. We're increasingly seeing the heat go towards buying off-the-shelf commercial large language models and then repurposing them for a defense context. Worrisome for a number of reasons, but among them is that these models are inherently insecure. There are vulnerabilities within them that just cannot be remedied. And they're also trained on data from like the broad population. And so there are particular privacy and safety issues. And then thirdly, that there's not sufficient testing and evaluation that's happening independently. A lot of these are like companies that are grading their own homework with the use of these systems. And so if you then put that into, national security contexts where the stakes can be really life or death, I really worry about that structure.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. That company suddenly could be telling you how great their product is working, and it's not, because they're doing their own evaluation, and yet that puts our national security at risk.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's leveled on the grounds that like you guys aren't expert enough to be able to understand these systems, and frankly, I think that that's not true. There is a really, robust way to independently test and evaluate these systems that doesn't have to sit within the same companies that are building them.
Yeah, and part of that could be done through some of the audit functions, although when it comes to the Pentagon, they failed 7 in a row. So maybe we'll think of another way to do that, but that's another podcast. So some of these things we talked about have a fairly direct impact. How about an indirect impact? How secure is AI, and should that be something of concern to people?
I think it's definitely something that should be of concern. And I think of at least 2 layers where that concern lies. One is that many AI systems that are in deployment have inherent vulnerabilities. There's certain kinds of cybersecurity attacks that can be leveraged against large language models like prompt injection and poison pills that are really difficult to remedy in the context in which they're being deployed. And so that's worrisome, where they're getting embedded across society and often in ways that we don't have a whole lot of insight into. The second plane of risk that I think we need to be concerned about is systemic risk. This is a very highly concentrated industry. In the news, we're seeing more and more reports about cross ownership across these companies, that there's monopolies happening all the way down the AI stack. And so if we get overly dependent on one system, or really what we're seeing is like a chain of interrelated systems, any vulnerability that occurs within that system is going to emanate out onto everybody that's dependent on it. We saw this recently with the CrowdStrike attack, where many systems that were running on certain Microsoft software went down. We've seen this with cloud services. And so that kind of systemic risk, I think, is another place that we need to be paying really close attention, especially as this industry continues to get more and more concentrated.
And the greatest risk, is it because they're going after some of our data and our privacy is at stake? Or what is that could be attacked or targeted?
Yeah, there's a number of different things. One is being able to exfiltrate data, and there are real privacy concerns. There's also just run-of-the-mill bugs that are completely unintended. But if you have a system be taken down, it can sort of affect a wider array of infrastructures. So there's both an intentional but also a totally unintentional plane of risks that are introduced there.
Gotcha. Now, one of the big questions, and we just barely mentioned at the beginning, are the data centers. The amount of energy and water that this uses. We had a proposed one that was going to happen down in Racine County in Wisconsin and Caledonia, and they just said they're not going to do it there now. But the amount of energy they were going to use was going to be equivalent to the city of Madison, our second largest city. And I just did town halls, 4 of them the other day, and this came up twice. People talking about data centers. There is a real concern around what this means, both environmentally, but also, to energy costs and infrastructure. If that has to be built out, are we paying for that? How do you see this issue around energy and maybe also water usage and these data centers, and also they're projecting this may be a key issue in our next governor's race, and I'm assuming if that's happening in my state, it's going to be happening across the country.
It is very much happening across the country right now. We've been engaging with a whole lot of different community organizations that are mobilizing around the data centers that are being built in their backyards. You touched on a few of the reasons why folks are concerned. It's the effects on their water, on the cost of their electricity, on the reliability of their electricity. There are climate and pollution concerns. There's also community health concerns. For example, in Memphis, the Colossus data center that xAI is building out is relying on gas turbines that are leading to sharp increases in rates of asthma and allergies. I was talking to an organizer over in MCAP, Memphis Community and he was saying that there are folks in their 80s that are having asthma crop up for the first time in their lives. And it's because of these turbines now in their backyard. And when the community pushed back, they just put it right over the border into Mississippi. And so I think this is a place where, it's mobilizing people at the community level, but there's also a need for mobilization that sort of goes across communities around the country to make sure that the terms on which these data centers are deployed, if at all, are responsive and accountable to the communities where they're being built. The last thing I'll say is that there's a lot of promise about jobs and economic growth that accompany these data centers. And a lot of the times when there's research that digs into these numbers, they really don't pan out. There might be short-term gains in, construction jobs, but they don't stick around. Sometimes they're bringing in workers from other states. They're not even, hiring locally. And so I think that's one place where it's especially important to kick the tires is on whether data centers are going to deliver on the economic promises that the companies trying to build them are making. Because a lot of times they don't actually deliver.
So if they have to have the data centers because AI does suck up so much power, then what's the right way we should be looking at this?
Well, that's the key question to be asking here, right? Why do we need to keep building AI at ever larger scale? Because if you look at, the actual use of AI and you ask engineers, a lot of times building a small and really narrowly tailored model is going to work far and away better than a giant sort of bloated multimodal model like the things that we're seeing OpenAI and some of these big tech giants build. So one answer might be to get into, really stress testing. Do we need to keep building AI in this way? Are we getting sufficient benefits for the harms that are introduced? we're not having that kind of like risk benefit calculation in the conversation about AI. I think we have a pretty clear view of what the risks are, but the benefits remain kind of like vague and more like abstracted, like this is going to be the future engine of innovation. But if you look at what companies are saying, you know, there were studies out of MIT the other day that said a lot of companies are not seeing productivity or efficiency gains when they've been using LLMs. And the Census Bureau 3 weeks ago said that a lot of companies that had been doing early pilots are now stepping back from them because they just didn't see enough utility. So I think we want to be sure that where we're using it, we're actually getting the benefit here, which there certainly can be, but not in all cases.
In LLM, what's that stand for?
Sorry, yes, that's large language model. It's the kind of AI that like is you know, I think the version that's in vogue, but it's by no means the only way that we need to be building AI right now.
Gotcha. This is kind of a giveaway, but should we be concerned that there are presidential cabinet secretaries who refer to AI as A1, like the steak sauce?
Yes. Yes, we should.
I couldn't resist. I just had to include that. It was one of the more stunning things. You know, when we do talk about technology, we used to have, prior to Newt Gingrich, nonpartisan technology advisor for Congress, which is what we should have, right? Someone nonpartisan, objective, just giving us information, and that was taken away. And you know, now we do have to rely on various industries to give us that information. And as you know, while you guys are great, you're not taking the corporate money, you're providing that kind of information. There's probably 100-fold giving us other information from a biased place.
And I mean, I would take it even further and say, like, we need to have technologists working in our enforcement agencies, like all across government, really, you know, making sure that people are, you know, both getting the benefits, but also are protected from the harms that kind of come from the, you know, deployment of this technology in so many different parts of our society at scale. And there's a lot of really good public servants who have been building out exactly those kinds of teams that have faced layoffs this year.
Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to make sure in this 30,000, maybe even 50,000 foot level that we're looking at this for listeners to just understand about AI that might answer some questions that you know are out there?
Yeah, it's a good prompt. I kind of want to go back to that original thing that I started with, which is that we don't need to treat this as inevitable, and that, you know, even where there, you know, hasn't been as much scope as one would have hoped to be able to sort of move things forward within Congress over the last couple of years, there is a lot of action that's happening on the ground within your local community, at the state level. People are, I think, really engaged and standing up, and there's a lot of scope for the public to be weighing in, and just making sure that, you know, where AI is getting used in our schools, in our healthcare systems, in our retail stores, it's really serving us, and not just a few big corporations.
That is the perfect way to explain that, because, right, we can shape this. We don't have to accept what people are trying to do to us. We need to be there to shape it in a way that benefits us. And I appreciate that. How do people follow you, or to follow AI Now Institute? Can you offer any of your socials?
Sure. So we're at AINowInstitute.org. You can also find us on Blue Sky, LinkedIn, Twitter, at AI Now Institute.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.